Congratulations, you're officially a dangerous woman, I whispered to myself, staring at the court documents in my trembling hands. My ex-husband Damien hadn't just moved on from our marriage, he was too busy convincing Judge Harrison that I was a violent stalker who needed to be kept 500 feet away from him at all times. Before we dive back in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is something truly special I can't wait to share. The restraining order papers felt like fire in my hands as I read his sworn statement. Veronica becomes physically aggressive when denied access to our former home. She has thrown objects, made threatening phone calls, and shown up uninvited multiple times, causing me to fear for my safety. Every single word was a lie. Standing in the marble lobby of the Riverside County Courthouse in California, I felt my entire world collapse around me. The woman staring back at me from the reflection in the polished floors looked nothing like the dangerous stalker described in these legal documents. I was Veronica Castellanos, a 34-year-old pediatric nurse who spent her days caring for sick children, not terrorizing ex-husbands, but Damien Rothwell, my ex-husband of exactly 47 days, had painted a very different picture for the court. The security guard glanced at me with suspicious eyes as I stood there, probably wondering if I was the type of person who might cause a disturbance. After all, I was holding a restraining order with my name on it. In his mind, I was already guilty of whatever crimes were listed on those papers. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march into that courtroom and tell everyone exactly what kind of man Damien really was. I wanted to explain how he was the one who had been calling me at 3 a.m., drunk and begging me to come back. I wanted to show them the text messages where he threatened to destroy my reputation if I didn't agree to give him half of my savings account that I'd built up over 8 years of working double shifts at Mercy General Hospital, but I didn't say a word, because 3 weeks earlier, my divorce attorney, Patricia Vance, had given me advice that probably saved my life. Veronica, whatever Damien does next, document everything and stay completely silent. Don't defend yourself publicly, don't engage with his provocations, and definitely don't try to contact him to set the record straight. Men like him want you to react. Your silence will be your greatest weapon. At the time, I thought she was being overly dramatic. Damien was manipulative, sure, but I never imagined he would go this far. I never thought he would weaponize the legal system against me, turning my own protective laws into tools of harassment. The restraining order meant I couldn't go within 500 feet of him, our former shared apartment on Maple Street, his workplace, at Henderson and Associates marketing firm, or even his favorite coffee shop, Brewster's Cafe, where we used to meet every Sunday morning during happier times. Essentially, I was being erased from half of downtown Riverside, forced to navigate around invisible boundaries like some kind of criminal. But here's what the court didn't know, what Judge Harrison couldn't see from his elevated bench, and what Damien was counting on me never revealing. I had been recording everything, not because I'm paranoid or vindictive, but because my best friend Catalina Rodriguez, a family law paralegal, had insisted I start documenting every interaction the moment our marriage started falling apart. Trust me, Ronnie, she'd said, guys like Damien don't just disappear quietly. They make sure you pay for leaving them. Catalina had been right about everything else, so I'd followed her advice. Every phone call, every text message, every time he showed up at my new apartment on Oak Boulevard unannounced, I documented it all. I even had security footage from my building that showed him pounding on my door at midnight, not the other way around. The most damning evidence sat in a folder on my kitchen table at home, photographs of the bruises on my arms from our last argument, when Damien had grabbed me so hard during our discussion about divorce that he'd left fingerprint-shaped marks that lasted for 2 weeks. I'd taken those photos on the advice of Dr. Sarah Kim, the ER physician who had quietly pulled me aside during one of my shifts and noticed the marks. Honey, Dr. Kim had said, I've seen this too many times. Document everything now, because it's going to get worse before it gets better. But despite having all this evidence, despite knowing the truth, despite having witnesses who could testify to Damien's real behavior, I had chosen to stay silent when the restraining order was filed. I didn't show up to contest it. I didn't present my evidence. I didn't even hire a lawyer to represent me at the hearing. To the outside world, my silence looked like guilt. The local legal community probably assumed I was indeed the violent ex-wife described in Damien's petition. After all, if I were innocent, wouldn't I fight back? Wouldn't I defend myself? What they didn't understand was that my silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy, because while Damien was busy playing victim in court, celebrating his legal victory with his new girlfriend Amber Chin, yes, he'd moved on that quickly, and probably thinking he'd successfully destroyed my reputation and my spirit. I was quietly building something much more powerful than a defense. I was building a case that would expose not just his lies about me, but a pattern of behavior that would shock everyone who thought they knew Damien Rothwell, the charming marketing executive with the perfect smile and the expensive suits. My phone buzzed with a text from Catalina. How did it go at the courthouse? Are you okay? I typed back, phase 1 complete. Now we wait. Because sometimes, the most dangerous thing you can do to a liar is let them keep talking. And Damien Rothwell was about to discover that my silence wasn't weakness, it was the calm. Before the storm, the restraining order in my hands wasn't my defeat. It was his confession, and I was just getting started. It took a lot of care and time to prepare and narrate this for you, so if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe really helps and means the world to us. Alright, let's get back to it. 6 months before that devastating moment in the courthouse, my life with Damien looked picture perfect from the outside. We lived in a beautiful 2-bedroom apartment overlooking the Riverside Marina, complete with floor-to-ceiling windows that caught the morning sunlight and a balcony where we drink coffee every Sunday while watching the boats drift by. I had worked overtime shifts for 2 years to afford the security deposit on that place, dreaming of building a stable home with the man I loved. Our relationship had started like a fairy tale. I met Damien at a hospital fundraising gala where his marketing firm, Henderson & Associates, was sponsoring the children's wing renovation, the same wing where I spent my days caring for young patients battling cancer, heart conditions, and other serious illnesses. He swept me off my feet with his confidence, his expensive cologne, and the way he seemed genuinely interested in my work as a pediatric nurse. You're saving lives every day, he told me on our third date, his green eyes sparkling as we walked along the Riverside promenade. That's incredible. I just sell people things they probably don't need. His self-deprecating humor was charming, and I fell hard for this successful, handsome man who seemed to truly see and appreciate me. Within 8 months, we were living together. Within 18 months, we were married in a small ceremony at the historic Grandview Gardens, surrounded by my co-workers from Mercy General, his colleagues from the marketing firm, and both our families. My mother, Carmen, had tears in her eyes as she watched me dance with Damien to At Last by Etta James. Mija, she whispered to me later, you deserve this happiness. You've worked so hard for everything you have. And I had worked hard. While Damien came from a comfortable middle-class family in Newport Beach, I had grown up in a working-class neighborhood in East LA, the daughter of a single mother who cleaned office buildings at night to put me through nursing school. Every achievement in my life, my nursing degree from UCLA, my job at one of California's most prestigious pediatric hospitals, my spotless credit score, my savings account with $47,000 that I'd accumulated 3 years of careful budgeting, and extra shifts represented sacrifice and determination. Damien knew this about me. He knew that my financial independence wasn't just money in the bank, it was security I'd never had growing up. He knew that my career wasn't just a job, it was my calling, my way of giving back to the world. He knew that my reputation at the hospital, where I was known for staying late with frightened children, for advocating fiercely for my patients, for never losing my temper even in the most stressful situations, was something I'd built through 8 years of dedication. What I didn't realize was that he saw all of these things not as qualities to admire and protect, but as weaknesses he could exploit. The first red flag came about 6 months into our marriage, though I didn't recognize it as such at the time. Damien started making comments about my work schedule, how I was always at the hospital and more committed to sick kids than to our marriage. When I explained that I was working extra shifts to build up our emergency fund for the house we wanted to buy, he'd smile and say, "We don't need you killing yourself, babe. I make enough for both of us." But I loved my work, and I'd seen too many women become financially dependent only to find themselves trapped when relationships went south. My friend Catalina, who worked as a paralegal at Rodriguez and Associates Family Law, had shared too many stories of women who'd given up their careers only to find themselves with no income and no recent work history when their marriages ended. The second red flag was subtler. Damien began inserting himself into my finances in small ways. He'd suggest we optimize our money by combining accounts. He'd offer to handle the bills since he was better with numbers. When I politely declined, maintaining that I preferred to keep our finances separate until we bought a house together, he'd joke about my trust issues, but I could see the irritation flash across his face. By month 8 of our marriage, the jokes weren't jokes anymore. Damien started questioning every purchase I made, every shift I picked up, every dollar I spent or saved. When I bought scrubs for work, he'd make comments about how I already had enough. When I sent money to help my mother with her rent, he'd ask why I was supporting someone else when we had our own future to think about. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in February. I'd just finished a particularly difficult shift where we'd lost a 7-year-old patient to complications from surgery. I came home emotionally drained, needing comfort from my husband. Instead, Damien met me at the door with printed bank statements and a calculator. "We need to talk about your spending problem," he announced, spreading papers across our kitchen table. "You've been sending $500 a month to your mother, plus you spent $200 on groceries last week, and don't get me started on these medical conference fees." I stared at him in disbelief. Spending problem? Damien, that money came from my account. From my paychecks. And that grocery bill was for both of us. "That's not the point," he snapped, his charming mask slipping completely. "We're married now. We're supposed to be a team. But you're making unilateral decisions about money that affects our future." "What future?" I asked, genuinely confused. We both agreed to keep our finances separate until we were ready to buy a house. "Nothing has changed." That's when he said something that should have sent me running. "Everything changed when you became my wife, Veronica. Your money, your decisions, your priorities, they all affect me now. And I won't be disrespected in my own home." I should have seen it then, the entitlement, the need to control, the way he viewed marriage as ownership rather than partnership. But I was exhausted, grieving for my young patient, and still believing that this was just stress talking, that we could work through this rough patch like any couple. Instead, I agreed to couples counseling. I started questioning whether maybe I was being too rigid about money, too independent for marriage. I began second-guessing decisions I'd been making successfully for years, wondering if Damien was right and I needed to be more of a team player. What I didn't know was that he was already planning my destruction, researching ways to access my accounts, studying my schedule to document my movements, and laying the groundwork for the accusations that would eventually land us in that courthouse. The life I'd built, my career, my savings, my reputation, my independence wasn't just being threatened. It was being systematically targeted by the person who was supposed to protect it, and the scariest part? I still had no idea what was coming. The first time I truly felt afraid of my own husband was on a Thursday morning in March, 3 weeks after our kitchen table confrontation about finances. I had woken up early for a 6 a.m. shift and was quietly getting ready in our bedroom when I noticed Damien wasn't in bed. This wasn't unusual. He'd been having trouble sleeping lately, often getting up to work on his laptop in the living room, but when I walked toward the kitchen to grab my coffee, I found him sitting at our dining table with my laptop open, my personal banking information displayed across the screen. He was writing numbers down in a small notebook, completely absorbed in whatever he was calculating. "Damien?" I said softly, not wanting to startle him. "What are you doing?" He looked up, and for just a split second, I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before, guilt mixed with defiance. Then his expression shifted back to that practiced smile. "Oh, hey babe. I couldn't sleep, so I thought I'd help you organize your finances. You've been so stressed about money lately." My blood went cold. "I never gave you my passwords." "You did, remember? Last month when you were sick with the flu and needed me to pay your credit card bill online?" His voice was smooth, reasonable, but something about it felt wronged. I did remember being sick, but I specifically recalled logging in myself and just asking him to read me the numbers from my phone while I typed. I had definitely not shared my passwords. But standing there in my scrubs, already running late for work, with a dozen critically ill children waiting for me, I didn't have time to process what this meant. "Just, please ask next time, okay?" I said, grabbing my coffee and kissing his cheek out of habit. "Of course, babe. I was just trying to help." But as I drove to work that morning, something nagged at me. How had he known which laptop I used for banking? I had two, one for work presentations and one for personal use. And my passwords were complex combinations I'd never written down or shared with anyone. At the hospital, during my lunch break, I called Catalina. "Cat, can I ask you something weird?" I said, sitting in the staff break room and lowering my voice. "If someone has your laptop, how hard would it be for them to figure out your passwords?" "Depends," she said immediately. "Are we talking about a random person or someone who lives with you and watches you type them in?" "Because Ronnie, anyone can learn passwords if they're paying attention." "Why are you asking?" I told her about finding Damien with my banking information. And the long silence on the other end of the phone made my stomach clench. "Veronica," Catalina said finally, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. Go to the bank today, during your lunch break. Change all your passwords. Check all your account activity for the past month. And start documenting every weird thing Damien does from now on." "Cat, you're being dramatic. He's my husband, not some criminal." "Honey, I process divorce cases all day long. I've seen this pattern before. Men don't just suddenly become interested in their wives' finances unless they're planning something. Promise me you'll check your accounts." That afternoon, I sat in my car outside Chase Bank on Riverside Avenue, staring at my phone screen in disbelief. 3 weeks ago, the same day as our kitchen confrontation, someone had attempted to add Damien as an authorized user on my savings account. The request had been denied because I hadn't provided proper authorization, but the attempt was there in black and white. 2 weeks ago, there had been multiple login attempts to my online banking from an IP address that wasn't mine. And just yesterday, someone had requested a credit report in my name from all 3 major bureaus. My hands were shaking as I walked into the bank and requested to speak with a manager. Gloria Martinez, a kind woman in her 50s who had helped me open my accounts years ago, listened with growing concern as I explained the situation. "Mrs. Rothwell," she said gently, "what you're describing sounds like preparation for identity theft or financial fraud. Has your husband asked you to co-sign anything lately? Any loans, credit cards, business ventures?" I thought back over the past month. He's been talking about starting his own marketing consultancy. He mentioned needing startup capital and asked if I'd be willing to invest, but I told him I wanted to see a business plan first. Gloria nodded knowingly. I'm going to recommend some immediate steps. First, we're changing all your account numbers and passwords today. Second, I'm placing fraud alerts on all your accounts. Third, you need to freeze your credit immediately. And fourth. She paused, studying my face carefully. You might want to consider opening a new account at a different bank, one your husband doesn't know about. That seems extreme, I protested, but even as I said it, I was remembering other strange incidents from recent weeks, like how Damien had suddenly become interested in my work schedule, asking detailed questions about which days I work late, when I had meetings, what time I usually got home. He'd never shown much interest in the specifics of my job before. Or how he'd started making comments about my coworkers, particularly the male doctors I worked with. Dr. Martinez seems to text you a lot, he'd say, reading over my shoulder when I received work-related messages. Is that really necessary? And then there were the phone calls. Damien had always been social, but lately he'd been having hushed conversations that would stop abruptly when I entered the room. When I asked who he was talking to, he'd give vague answers about work stuff or just Jason from college. But the most unsettling change was how he'd started questioning my whereabouts with an intensity that felt like interrogation. If I was 10 minutes late from work, he wanted to know exactly what had delayed me. If I stopped at the grocery store without mentioning it beforehand, he'd act hurt that I hadn't communicated my plans. You're becoming secretive, Veronica, he'd said just last week when I'd grabbed dinner with Catalina after work. We used to tell each other everything. Now I feel like I'm living with a stranger. The irony of that statement hit me as I sat in Gloria's office, signing papers to secure my accounts. I wasn't the one becoming secretive, I was the one being secretly investigated. That evening, I did something I'd never done before in our relationship. I lied. When Damien asked about my day, I told him it had been routine, just patience and paperwork. I didn't mention the bank visit, the discovered login attempts, or the new accounts I'd opened. Instead, I watched him carefully, looking for signs I'd been blind to before, and what I saw terrified me, the way his eyes followed me around our apartment, tracking my movements. The way he positioned himself to see my phone screen whenever I received a text. The way he asked casual questions that weren't casual at all. Did you remember to pick up your mail from the lobby? Have you checked your credit score lately? When was the last time you talked to your mom about money? That night, as Damien slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling and realized that my marriage wasn't just ending, it was becoming dangerous. And the man I'd promised to love and trust was systematically preparing to destroy everything I'd worked to build. The question was, what was he planning to do with all the information he'd been gathering? And more importantly, how long did I have before he put his plan into action? The truth hit me like a freight train on a rainy Tuesday evening in April, and it came from the most unexpected source, Damien's own carelessness. I had just finished a brutal 12-hour shift dealing with a pediatric emergency, a car accident victim who reminded me heartbreakingly of my little nephew. I was emotionally drained and physically exhausted as I climbed the stairs to our apartment, wanting nothing more than a hot shower and silence. But as I approached our door, I could hear Damien's voice through the thin walls, animated and excited in a way I hadn't heard in months. Perfect timing, Jason. She's working those long shifts. Again, completely clueless about what's coming. The documentation is all set up. I froze on the landing, my key halfway to the lock. Jason Chin was Damien's college roommate who'd become a divorce attorney specializing in high-conflict cases. They'd reconnected 6 months ago when Jason moved his practice from San Francisco to Riverside. At the time, I thought it was nice that Damien was rekindling old friendships. Now, standing outside my own apartment listening to my husband discuss documentation with a divorce lawyer, I felt my blood turned to ice. The restraining order petition is already drafted, Damien continued, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone admiring their own handiwork. 3 months of careful planning, and I've got everything we need. Photos of the alleged incidents. A timeline of her aggressive behavior, witness statements from co-workers about her stress levels and mood swings. My legs nearly gave out. I gripped the stair railing so hard my knuckles went white. Photos of alleged incidents? Witness statements? What was he talking about? You're sure the financial stuff will hold up? Jason's voice was fainter, probably on speakerphone, but I could hear the professional calculation in his tone. Because if she contests the emergency orders, we need to be bulletproof. Trust me, I've been documenting her erratic spending for months. The gambling addiction angle is genius. Those late-night ATM withdrawals look exactly like casino runs, and I've got screenshots of her bank account showing the unexplained cash withdrawals. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from gasping out loud. The late-night ATM withdrawals he was referring to were from when I'd been helping my mother pay for her prescription medications, expensive heart pills that her insurance wouldn't cover. My mother had been too proud to ask directly, so I'd been quietly withdrawing cash and leaving it in her mailbox with notes saying it was from extra shifts at the hospital. And the domestic violence claims? Jason asked. You know judges are taking those more seriously these days. All documented, Damien said, and I could hear papers rustling. Hospital records showing she comes to work with injuries. Co-worker testimonies about her violent outbursts and mood swings. Photos of damage to our apartment that clearly show someone with anger management issues. Each word felt like a physical blow. The injuries he was referencing were from my job. Bruises from restraining agitated patients, cuts from medical equipment, the occupational hazards of working in a pediatric trauma unit. I'd never hidden these from Damien. I'd actually complained to him about how difficult some shifts were, never imagining he was cataloging my work injuries as evidence of violence. The co-worker testimonies had to be manipulated statements about my stress levels during particularly difficult cases, like when we lost young patients or dealt with child abuse situations. Every nurse experienced emotional reactions to trauma. It was part of being human. But somehow Damien had twisted my professional dedication and emotional investment in my patients into evidence of instability. What about the apartment damage? Jason continued. Can you tie that directly to her? Damien laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl. Remember that night 3 weeks ago when she supposedly threw a plate during dinner? I made sure to take photos of the broken ceramic and the scuff marks on the wall. Of course, she was actually at work during a double shift when I broke that plate myself, but the photos don't show timestamps. The room spun around me. I remembered that night clearly because I'd come home to find Damien cleaning up broken dishes, claiming he'd been clumsy and dropped them while doing the washing. I'd actually felt bad for him, thinking he was stressed about work. Now I realized he'd been staging evidence for a restraining order. And the witness statements from neighbors about noise complaints? Already handled. Mrs. Patterson from 3B is convinced she's heard domestic disturbances from our apartment. What she actually heard were those action movies I've been playing at high volume when Veronica's at work, with me occasionally shouting at the TV. But when I talked to her about being concerned about the situation, she was happy to document the noise complaints. I slumped against the wall, my scrubs still damp from the hospital's humidity, my hands shaking as the full scope of Damien's betrayal became clear. This wasn't a sudden decision to divorce me. This was a calculated, methodical plan to destroy my reputation, my career, and my financial security. The beauty of it, Damien continued, is that she's been so focused on her job and so trusting that she hasn't noticed any of it. She still thinks I'm just stressed about work when I ask questions about her schedule. She has no idea I've been building a case against her for months. What about her savings account? Jason asked. That's a substantial amount for someone in her position. That's the best part. Once the restraining order goes through and she's painted as the unstable, violent party, I can claim that her savings represent money she's been hiding from me during our marriage. Add in the gambling addiction narrative, and I can argue that she's been secretly liquidating our joint assets to feed her habit. I bit down on my own fist to keep from screaming. My savings account represented 8 years of careful budgeting, overtime shifts, and sacrifices. Every dollar had been earned through my own labor, most of it before I even met Damien. But he was planning to paint it as marital property that I'd been secretly mismanaging. Timeline for filing? Jason asked, and I could hear the scratching of a pen as he took notes. 2 weeks. I want to wait until after her performance review at the hospital. If she gets a good review, I can use it against her, argue that she's manipulative enough to hide her violent tendencies from her employers. If she gets a bad review, even better, it supports the instability claims. My performance review was scheduled for next Friday. I'd been nervous about it because our department had been dealing with budget cuts and increased patient loads, making everyone's job more stressful. I'd been working extra hard to maintain my usual standards, never imagining that either outcome would be weaponized against me. What about evidence from her side? Jason pressed. Does she have anything that could contradict your claims? Nothing, Damien said confidently. She's too naive and trusting. She doesn't document anything, doesn't save text messages, doesn't even keep records of her own financial transactions beyond basic banking. She's been living in this fantasy where she thinks our marriage is just going through a rough patch that we can work through with counseling. The counseling sessions. I thought about all the times I'd opened up to our therapist, Dr. Rebecca Torres, about my fears that I wasn't being a good enough wife, that maybe I was too independent for marriage, that perhaps I needed to be more compromising. Damien had sat beside me, holding my hand, nodding sympathetically as I blamed myself for our problems. Now I realized he'd been taking mental notes, gathering ammunition from my own vulnerabilities and self-doubts. One more thing, Damien added, and his voice dropped to what he probably thought was a whisper but was still audible through our thin walls. I need you to have the papers ready for service the day after the restraining order is granted. Maximum impact, minimum opportunity for her to prepare a defense. Smart, Jason agreed. Hit her while she's reeling from the public humiliation of being served with a restraining order. She'll be too emotional and scattered to think strategically. As their conversation wound down and I heard Damien moving toward the door, I realized I had maybe 30 seconds to get inside and pretend I'd just arrived home. I unlocked the door as quietly as possible and slipped inside, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. Hey babe, Damien called out, ending his phone call and walking toward me with that familiar, practiced smile. How was your shift? I looked at this man I'd married, this person I'd trusted with my heart and my future, and saw him clearly for the first time. He wasn't my husband anymore. He was my enemy, and he'd been working to destroy me for months while I'd been desperately trying to save our marriage. It was fine, I managed, my voice surprisingly steady. Just another day saving lives. As he kissed my cheek and asked what I wanted for dinner, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to be the naive, trusting victim he'd planned on. It was time to start documenting everything. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. Not because I was physically ill, but because I needed time to think, to plan, and most importantly, to start building my own case before Damien could execute his. I waited until he left for his office at Henderson and Associates, kissing me goodbye with that same practiced affection while secretly planning my destruction. The moment his car disappeared around the corner of Maple Street, I was on the phone with Catalina. Kat, I need you to take a long lunch today. Come to my apartment. And bring your recorder. Ronnie, what's wrong? You sound different. Everything's wrong. And you were right about documenting everything. I need help, and I need it from someone who understands the legal system. Catalina arrived within 2 hours, carrying not just her digital recorder but a briefcase full of legal forms, a camera, and something I didn't expect: her boss, Elena Rodriguez, senior partner at Rodriguez and Associates Family Law. Veronica, Elena said, settling into my living room chair with the authority of someone who'd handled hundreds of complex divorce cases. Catalina filled me in on the basics during the drive over. Before we start, I need you to understand that anything you tell me is protected by attorney-client privilege, even in this preliminary consultation. Elena was a formidable woman in her early 50s, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that missed nothing. She'd built her reputation representing women in high-stakes divorces, particularly cases involving financial manipulation and domestic abuse allegations. If Catalina trusted her enough to bring her into this situation, I knew I was in capable hands. For the next hour, I told them everything. About overhearing Damien's phone call with Jason Chin, about the systematic evidence fabrication, about months of financial investigation and behavioral documentation. Elena took notes in a leather-bound journal, occasionally asking sharp questions. That revealed just how dangerous my situation really was. Veronica, she said when I finished, what your husband is planning isn't just divorce proceedings. It's character assassination designed to destroy your career, your financial security, and your reputation in the community. The restraining order is just the opening move. Catalina was pacing behind Elena's chair, her paralegal instincts in full gear. The gambling addiction angle is particularly clever. Once that narrative gets into court documents, it becomes public record. Even if you prove it's false later, the damage to your nursing license could be permanent. Which is exactly why we need to move fast, Elena continued. But we're going to do this intelligently. No emotional reactions, no confrontations, no tipping our hand until we're ready. Damien thinks he's playing against an amateur, but he's about to discover he's facing a professional team. Our first stop was the bank, where Elena introduced me to Mitchell Williams, a forensic accountant who specialized in divorce cases involving financial fraud. Mitchell was a thin, methodical man in his 40s who looked like he could find a needle in a haystack of financial records. Mrs. Rothwell, Mitchell said, reviewing the preliminary documents Elena had asked me to bring, your husband has made several critical errors in his planning. The most important one is that he's been so focused on fabricating evidence against you that he's left clear digital footprints of his own behavior. Mitchell pulled up his laptop and began showing us banking records, credit reports, and digital transaction histories that painted a very different picture than the one Damien thought he was creating. These ATM withdrawals that he's planning to characterize as gambling activity? They're all from machines near medical pharmacies or your mother's neighborhood. We can trace the exact locations and times, and cross-reference them with your work schedule to show a clear pattern of legitimate family assistance. More importantly, he continued, your husband has been accessing your financial accounts without authorization for months. Each login attempt, each unauthorized inquiry, each attempt to modify account access, it's all documented in the bank's security logs. Elena smiled grimly. Financial crimes leave better paper trails than almost any other type of fraud. Damien thought he was being clever, but he's actually been building our case against him. Our next ally came from an unexpected source. Dr. Sarah Kim, the ER physician who had noticed my work-related injuries months ago, agreed to meet us at a coffee shop near the hospital during her break. When Elena explained the situation, Dr. Kim's reaction was swift and decisive. That bastard, she said, her usually calm demeanor cracking. I've been documenting workplace injuries for 15 years, and I specifically noted in my personal files That your injuries were consistent with patient care incidents, not domestic violence. I remember because I was concerned about the hospital's safety protocols, not about your home life. Dr. Kim pulled out her phone and began making calls. Within an hour, she had contacted 4 other medical professionals who had either treated my work-related injuries or witnessed the incidents that caused them. Each agreed to provide sworn statements about the nature and origin of my injuries. But there's more we can do, Dr. Kim said. Hospital security footage. Every shift you've worked in the past 6 months, every injury incident, every time you've stayed late to help with emergency cases, it's all on video. I can get you access to those records. Meanwhile, Catalina was working her own network of contacts. She'd reached out to Rosa Martinez, a private investigator who had helped the law firm with previous cases involving deceptive spouses. The neighbor. Statements are going to be easy to discredit, Rosa explained when she joined us that afternoon. Mrs. Patterson from 3B has a history of noise complaints against multiple tenants. More importantly, the building's management company keeps detailed logs of actual noise complaints. If she never officially reported domestic disturbances to the building management, it undermines her credibility as a witness. Rosa had also done preliminary research on Jason Chin, Damien's college friend and legal collaborator. He's been sanctioned twice by the state bar for questionable practices in divorce cases. Both times involved fabricated evidence and witness manipulation. This isn't his first rodeo, which means he's likely to make the same mistakes that got him in trouble before. By late afternoon, our informal war room had grown to include 2 more crucial allies. Dr. Rebecca Torres, our marriage counselor, had agreed to speak with Elena privately about the context of our sessions and Damien's behavior during therapy. I can't share specific details of your sessions, Dr. Torres explained, but I can testify about general patterns of manipulation and gaslighting that I observed. More importantly, I keep detailed session notes, and Damien's behavior patterns are going to contradict the image he's trying to project in court. Our final ally of the day was someone I never would have thought to contact, my neighbor from across the hall, Mr. Antonio Valdez, a retired police detective who had occasionally chatted with me in the building's laundry room when Rosa approached him as part of her canvas of potential witnesses. Mr. Valdez revealed something that changed everything. I've been keeping informal logs of unusual activity in the building for the past year, he explained, showing us a small notebook filled with careful handwriting. Old habits from 30 years on the force. I've documented every time I've heard actual disturbances, every time I've seen people coming and going at unusual hours, every time something seemed off. He flipped through pages of observations, landing on several entries from recent months. There's no record of domestic violence sounds from your apartment. But there are multiple entries about loud movie sounds from your apartment during times when I knew you were at work, because I'd seen you leave in your scrubs hours earlier. You documented the staged noise incidents, Elena said, reading over the entries. Without even knowing that's what they were. Mr. Valdez nodded grimly. 30 years of police work teaches you to notice patterns. Your husband has been creating disturbances when you're not home, but anyone paying attention would know the timeline doesn't match his claims. As the day ended and our impromptu team began to disperse, Elena gathered everyone for a final briefing. We now have a comprehensive counter-strategy. Financial experts to debunk the money allegations, medical professionals to explain the injury claims, building witnesses to contradict the domestic violence narrative, and documented proof of Damien's actual behavior. But remember, she cautioned, we can't let him know we're building this case. Veronica, you need to continue acting exactly as you have been. Go to work, maintain your normal routine, don't change anything about your behavior that might alert him. Catalina walked me back to my apartment as the sun set over Riverside. How do you feel? She asked. For the first time in months, I felt something I'd almost forgotten: hope. I feel like I'm not fighting this alone anymore. That night, as Damien came home and asked about my sick day, I smiled and told him I just needed some rest. He seemed satisfied with this explanation, probably thinking that his psychological manipulation was working, that I was becoming more compliant and less aware. He had no idea that while he'd been at work planning my destruction, I'd been assembling a team that would expose every lie he'd constructed. The hunt was about to become the hunted, and he was walking right into our trap. Over the next 10 days, while Damien believed he was executing the final stages of his master plan, my team and I worked around the clock to build an impenetrable defense that would turn his every accusation into evidence of his own deception. The first breakthrough came from Mitchell Williams, our forensic accountant, who had been analyzing Damien's own financial records with the precision of a surgeon. What he discovered was beyond anything we had expected. "Veronica," Mitchell said during our clandestine meeting at a small cafe on the outskirts of town, "your husband isn't just planning to steal your savings. He's been systematically preparing to disappear with substantial amounts of money that don't belong to him." He spread printouts across our corner table, his voice low but urgent. 3 weeks ago, Damien opened a business account for something called Rothwell Marketing Solutions. He's been diverting money from his employer's client accounts into this personal business account, probably planning to claim it as legitimate consulting income during the divorce proceedings. My stomach dropped. How much money are we talking about? So far? Nearly $85,000. But here's the really damning part: he's been using falsified invoices and fake client contracts to justify these transfers. This isn't just divorce fraud, Veronica. This is embezzlement from his own employer. Elena, who had been taking notes in her precise handwriting, looked up sharply. This changes everything. We're not just dealing with a manipulative divorce strategy anymore. We're looking at felony charges. Meanwhile, Rosa Martinez had been conducting surveillance that revealed the true scope of Damien's deception. She'd been following his movements, documenting his meetings, and uncovering a network of accomplices that stretched far beyond Jason Chin. "Your husband has been busy," Rosa reported during our evening briefing at Elena's office. "He's been meeting regularly with 3 other people besides his lawyer friend. There's Linda Foster, a paralegal who works at a different firm but apparently specializes in helping people fabricate documents for custody and restraining order cases." She pulled out surveillance photos showing Damien meeting with a thin blonde woman at various coffee shops around Riverside. Foster has been sanctioned by the State Bar Association twice for unethical practices, but she's still operating under the radar. They've been meeting weekly for the past month, always paying in cash, always meeting in different locations. "Who else?" Elena asked, studying the photographs. "Thomas Bradley, a private investigator who's been taking photographs of Veronica without her knowledge. He's the one who's been documenting her erratic behavior and creating the visual evidence for the restraining order petition." The blood drained from my face as Rosa showed me photos of myself that I'd never known were being taken. Images of me crying in my car after particularly difficult shifts at the hospital, pictures of me looking disheveled after working 16-hour days, shots of me appearing to argue with someone on the phone, though I knew those conversations had been with insurance companies about patient care authorizations. "The third person is the most concerning," Rosa continued. "Marcus Webb, who works in the records department at Mercy General Hospital. Damien has been paying him to access your employment records, your schedule, and possibly your patient files." Elena's pen stopped moving. "That's a HIPAA violation on top of everything else. Webb could face federal charges for accessing medical records without authorization. Dr. Sarah Kim had been working her own investigation within the hospital, and what she discovered validated our worst fears while simultaneously providing us with powerful ammunition. Marcus Webb has been accessing not just Veronica's files, but confidential patient information, Dr. Kim reported during her lunch break meeting with us. He's been printing out incident reports involving Veronica's patients, probably to use as evidence of her involvement in violent situations. But here's what Webb and Damien don't understand, she continued with satisfaction. Every access to our computer system is logged with timestamps, IP addresses, and user identification. Hospital security has been tracking unusual access patterns, and Webb's activities have already triggered internal investigation protocols. Dr. Kim had convinced the hospital's IT security department to provide her with comprehensive logs of Webb's unauthorized activities. We have evidence of him accessing files during non-work hours, printing documents he has no legitimate reason to view, and specifically targeting records related to Veronica's patients and work incidents. The most shocking discovery came from our retired police detective neighbor, Mr. Valdez, who had been discreetly investigating the building's security systems. "Your husband has been tampering with the building's security cameras," he informed us during a carefully planned encounter in the laundry room. "He's been covering the lens on the camera that monitors the hallway outside your apartment during specific time periods that correspond with when he's been staging those noise incidents." Mr. Valdez had been quietly reviewing security footage with the building manager, a friend from his police days. The pattern is clear: camera obstruction followed by loud noises, followed by camera uncovering. But he was sloppy about the timing, and we can prove the obstruction was deliberate. Meanwhile, Dr. Rebecca Torres, our marriage counselor, had been reviewing her session notes and had made a discovery that would be devastating to Damien's credibility. "I cannot share the specific content of your couple's sessions," Dr. Torres explained during her confidential meeting with Elena. "But I can testify about observable patterns of manipulation and deception. More importantly, I've been keeping detailed notes about inconsistencies in Damien's statements and behavior during our sessions." She showed Elena a thick folder of session notes. "Damien has been lying to me consistently about his work schedule, his activities, and his reasons for requesting specific session times. I've documented multiple instances where his stories about events don't align with reality. The most significant finding," Dr. Torres continued, "is that Damien has been using our sessions to practice his victim narrative. He's been testing different versions of events to see which ones I respond to with the most sympathy or concern. As our team's investigation deepened, we uncovered layer after layer of Damien's systematic planning. He hadn't just been preparing to file a restraining order, he'd been constructing an entire false reality designed to destroy every aspect of my life." Mitchell discovered that Damien had been researching my employer's policies regarding criminal charges against employees. He'd found articles about nurses losing their licenses due to domestic violence convictions and had saved them in a folder on his laptop titled VR Career Destruction. Rosa's surveillance revealed that Damien had been photographing my car at various locations, probably to document stalking behavior by showing that I was following him to places where we both had legitimate reasons to be. Linda Foster, the unethical paralegal, had been helping Damien research my past relationships, looking for ex-boyfriends or former colleagues who might be willing to make statements about my violent tendencies or unstable behavior. But the most chilling discovery came from hospital security footage that Dr. Kim had managed to access. The recording showed Thomas Bradley, the private investigator, taking photographs inside the hospital during my shifts. He'd been posing as a visitor or patient family member to get close enough to document me during stressful moments with patients or their families. "This is criminal stalking," Elena declared after reviewing all the evidence our team had compiled. "What Damien has orchestrated goes far beyond divorce fraud. This is a conspiracy involving multiple people committing multiple felonies. By the end of the 10-day period, we had assembled a comprehensive dossier that exposed every element of Damien's plan while simultaneously proving that he was the one engaging in the exact behaviors he was accusing me of: harassment, stalking, financial manipulation, and deception. Elena called a final strategy meeting the night before Damien's planned restraining order filing. "Tomorrow, he's going to walk into that courthouse thinking he's about to destroy you," she said. "Instead, he's going to hand us everything we need to destroy him." As I drove home that evening, knowing that Damien was probably making final preparations for what he believed would be my downfall, I felt a calm determination I'd never experienced before. I wasn't the naive, trusting woman he'd been manipulating. 4 months. I was someone who had learned to think strategically, to build alliances, and to fight back with intelligence rather than emotion. Tomorrow, Damien would discover that his perfectly planned ambush had become his own trap. And unlike him, when I sprung my trap, every piece of evidence would be absolutely true. The morning of the restraining order hearing, I woke up at 5 a.m. to find Damien already gone. He'd left early, probably to meet with Jason Chin for final preparations. Before what he believed would be my public humiliation and professional destruction. As I made my coffee in our kitchen for what I knew would be the last time, I felt a strange sense of peace. Today was the day Damien would discover that his perfect plan had a fatal flaw. He'd underestimated the woman he was trying to destroy. Elena had crafted our counter-strategy with the precision of a chess grandmaster. We weren't just going to defend against Damien's false allegations, we were going to use his own restraining order hearing as the platform to expose his entire criminal conspiracy. The beauty of our approach, Elena had explained during our final preparation meeting, is that Damien has requested an expedited hearing, which means less time for him to prepare if things go sideways. He's so confident in his fabricated evidence that he won't see our counterattack coming until it's too late to adapt. Our first strategic move had already been set in motion. At 7 a.m., while Damien was meeting with his lawyer, Mitchell Williams was walking into the offices of Henderson and Associates marketing firm with a briefcase full of financial evidence and a warrant that Elena had helped him obtain through the district attorney's office. "Mr. Henderson," Mitchell would be saying right about now, "we need to discuss some irregularities in your client accounts that appear to involve your employee, Damien Rothwell." The timing was crucial. We wanted Damien's employer to discover his embezzlement activities at exactly the same moment he was trying to paint himself as a trustworthy victim in court. By the time the restraining order hearing began at 10 a.m., Henderson and Associates would be conducting an emergency audit of every account Damien had access to. Meanwhile, Dr. Sarah Kim was implementing the second phase of our strategy at Mercy General Hospital. At 8 a.m., she was meeting with the hospital's chief of security and the head of IT to formally report Marcus Webb's unauthorized access to my medical records and patient files. "We've documented over 40 instances of illegal system access," Dr. Kim would be explaining, "all connected to what appears to be a conspiracy to gather information for use in fraudulent legal proceedings." The hospital's response would be swift and decisive. Webb would be suspended immediately, his system access revoked, and criminal charges filed within hours. More importantly for our case, the hospital's legal department would be issuing a statement about the breach of patient confidentiality, which Elena could introduce as evidence during the hearing. Our third strategic element involved Rosa Martinez, who had spent the early morning hours coordinating with building management and several key neighbors. At 9 a.m., she was conducting a formal canvass of all residents in our apartment building, documenting their actual experiences and comparing them to the false witness statements that Linda Foster had helped Damien fabricate. The contrast is going to be stark, Rosa had predicted. Real witnesses who actually lived there versus manufactured statements from people who were coached on what to say. But our masterstroke was what Elena called the mirror strategy, using Damien's own methodology against him, but with actual truth instead of fabricated evidence. At 9:30 a.m., 30 minutes before the hearing, Elena would be filing an emergency cross-petition for a restraining order against Damien, supported by the mountain of evidence we'd assembled over the past 2 weeks. Every piece of documentation would be real, every witness statement would be truthful, and every allegation would be supported by independently verifiable facts. We're going to give the judge exactly what Damien thinks he's giving the judge, Elena had explained, except our version will be backed by actual evidence instead of lies. The cross petition would detail Damien's financial stalking, his unauthorized access to my accounts, his conspiracy with multiple accomplices to fabricate evidence, his workplace embezzlement, and his systematic campaign of harassment disguised as marriage problems. As I dressed for court that morning, choosing a conservative navy suit that projected competence and credibility, I thought about how completely the tables had turned. 2 weeks ago, I'd been a naive victim who didn't even know she was being targeted. Today, I was walking into court with a legal team that had outmaneuvered every aspect of Damien's plan. At 9 a.m., I received the first in a series of text updates from our team. Mitchell, Henderson and Associates has confirmed embezzlement. Police have been called. Damien's access to all company systems has been revoked. At 9:15, Dr. Kim Webb has been arrested. Hospital security has confirmed 47 unauthorized access attempts. Criminal charges filed. At 9:25, Rosa, building canvas complete. 0 residents confirmed domestic disturbance reports. Mrs. Patterson admits she never actually witnessed violence, only heard movie sounds. As I walked into the Riverside County Courthouse at 9:45 a.m., Elena met me in the lobby with a satisfied smile. Everything is in motion, she said quietly. Damien's world is collapsing around him, but he doesn't know it yet. We took our seats in the courtroom, and I watched as Damien entered with Jason Chin. He looked confident, almost smug, carrying himself with the bearing of someone who believed he was about to win a decisive victory. He glanced at me once, probably expecting to see fear or resignation, but I met his gaze with calm determination. Judge Patricia Morrison called the court to order at exactly 10 a.m. She was a veteran family court judge known for her no-nonsense approach to domestic relations cases and her particular intolerance for fraud or manipulation. We're here for the matter of Rothwell versus Rothwell, Judge Morrison announced. Mr. Chin, I understand you're representing the petitioner requesting a restraining order. Jason Chin stood confidently. Yes, Your Honor. We have substantial evidence of domestic violence, financial irresponsibility, and stalking behavior that requires immediate intervention to protect my client. As Chin began his presentation, outlining Damien's carefully crafted narrative of victimization, I watched Elena take notes and occasionally check her phone for updates from our team. Everything was proceeding exactly as we'd anticipated. Chin presented the fabricated photos, the manipulated witness statements, the twisted financial records, and the false timeline of events. Damien sat beside his lawyer, occasionally nodding gravely as if recounting painful memories, playing the role of the suffering victim to perfection. Your Honor, Chin concluded, my client fears for his safety and his financial security. We request an immediate restraining order and emergency freezing of all joint assets pending a full investigation of Mrs. Rothwell's gambling addiction and violent behavior. Judge Morrison reviewed the submitted documents with the thorough attention of someone who'd seen every type of domestic relations case imaginable. Mrs. Rothwell, she said, looking at me directly, do you have representation? Elena stood gracefully. Yes, Your Honor. Elena Rodriguez representing Mrs. Rothwell. And Your Honor, we have a cross-petition to file, along with some urgent information that directly contradicts Mr. Chen's allegations. The confidence in Damien's posture shifted slightly as Elena approached the bench with our thick folder of documents. This wasn't part of his script. In his carefully planned scenario, I was supposed to be sitting there alone, overwhelmed and defenseless. Your Honor, Elena said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd won dozens of similar cases, what we have here isn't a case of domestic violence or financial irresponsibility. What we have is a complex criminal conspiracy involving multiple parties who have engaged in embezzlement, fraud, stalking, and perjury in an attempt to destroy my client's reputation and steal her assets. As Elena began presenting our evidence, starting with the financial records that proved Damien's embezzlement and unauthorized access to my accounts, I watched the color drain from both Damien's and Jason Chen's faces. Furthermore, Your Honor, Elena continued, we have documentation proving that the petitioner has been working with a network of accomplices to fabricate evidence, tamper with building security systems, illegally access hospital records, and conduct unauthorized surveillance of my client. Judge Morrison's expression grew increasingly stern as she reviewed our documentation. Elena's presentation was methodical, building from Damien's financial crimes to his evidence fabrication to his criminal network, creating a picture of systematic deception that stood in stark contrast to the victim narrative Chen had just presented. When Elena finished, the courtroom was silent except for the sound of Damien's rapid breathing. His perfect plan hadn't just failed, it had become the instrument of his own destruction. Judge Morrison looked up from our documents, her gaze moving from Damien to Jason Chen with the cold stare of someone who'd just discovered she'd been presented with fraudulent evidence. Mr. Chen, she said slowly, I'm going to give you one opportunity to explain to this court why I shouldn't hold both you and your client in contempt for presenting what appears to be fabricated evidence in my courtroom. The silence in Judge Morrison's courtroom stretched for what felt like an eternity as Jason Chen sat frozen, his confident demeanor crumbling under the weight of being caught red-handed with fabricated evidence. Damien, meanwhile, had gone completely pale, his hands gripping the edge of the defendant's table so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Your Honor, Chen finally stammered, we had no knowledge that any of this evidence was fabricated. My client assured me that all documentation was authentic. Judge Morrison's expression could have cut glass. Mr. Chen, are you telling this court that you failed to verify the evidence before presenting it? Or are you suggesting that you were also deceived by your client? Before Chen could answer, the courtroom doors opened and two uniformed police officers entered, followed by Detective Sarah Huang from the Riverside Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. The timing was perfect. Elena had coordinated this moment to maximize the impact of what was about to unfold. Your Honor, Detective Huang announced, approaching the bench, I apologize for the interruption, but we have an arrest warrant for Damien Rothwell in connection with embezzlement charges filed by Henderson and Associates marketing firm. The courtroom erupted in murmurs as Damien shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is ridiculous, he shouted, his composed mask finally slipping completely. This is a setup. She's behind all of this. Judge Morrison banged her gavel sharply. Mr. Rothwell, sit down and control yourself, or I'll have you removed from this courtroom. But Damien was beyond rational thought now. You don't understand, he continued, pointing at me with a shaking finger. She's been planning this for weeks. She's manipulated everyone. She's the violent one. She's the criminal. Mr. Rothwell, Judge Morrison's voice cut through his rant like a blade, you are making statements that directly contradict the evidence your own attorney just presented to this court. Are you now claiming that your allegations against your wife were false? The question hung in the air like a trap, and Damien walked right into it. No. Yes. I mean. He paused, realizing he was contradicting himself. She forced me to defend myself. She's been threatening me for months. Elena stood calmly. Your Honor, if I may, we have recordings that directly contradict Mr. Rothwell's current statements. She nodded to Rosa Martinez, who had been sitting quietly in the gallery. Rosa approached the bench with a small digital recorder and a stack of transcripts. These are recordings of conversations between Mr. Rothwell and his co-conspirators, including detailed discussions of their plan to fabricate evidence against my client, Elena explained. We also have video surveillance showing Mr. Rothwell tampering with security cameras in their apartment building and staging the noise incidents he's claiming were domestic violence. As Rosa handed the materials to Judge Morrison, Damien made a decision that sealed his fate. Instead of remaining silent or consulting with his lawyer, he launched into a desperate attempt to control the narrative. "She's lying," he screamed, no longer caring about courtroom decorum. "Those recordings are fake. She's been stalking me. She's been harassing me at work. She's obsessed with destroying my career because I wanted a divorce." Jason Chin was frantically trying to get his client's attention, making cutting motions across his throat, but Damien was beyond listening to legal counsel. "She turned my own employer against me," Damien continued, his voice rising to a near shriek. "She manipulated the hospital staff. She convinced my neighbors to lie. This whole thing is a conspiracy to frame me." Judge Morrison listened to this outburst with the expression of someone watching a defendant convict himself in real time. When Damien finally paused to catch his breath, she spoke with deadly calm. "Mr. Rothwell, you've just admitted to several interesting facts. First, that you were planning to divorce your wife, which contradicts your claim that her behavior was unexpected. Second, that you believe she has influence over your employer, your wife's workplace, and your neighbors, which suggests these are credible institutions, not co-conspirators. And third, that you view their statements as evidence of a conspiracy against you, rather than accurate reporting of your behavior." Elena stepped forward. "Your Honor, we'd like to present additional evidence that arrived during this morning's proceedings." She handed the judge a folder that had been delivered by courier just minutes before. "These are the results of the emergency audit conducted by Henderson and Associates this morning. They show that Mr. Rothwell has stolen $127,000 from client accounts over the past 4 months, using falsified invoices and fake business entities." Damien's face went from pale to gray. The amount was even higher than we'd originally discovered. "Furthermore," Elena continued, "the FBI has seized Mr. Rothwell's computers and discovered evidence of a sophisticated fraud operation involving multiple accomplices across several states. The private investigator he hired, Thomas Bradley, was also conducting similar evidence fabrication schemes for other clients facing divorce proceedings." Judge Morrison looked up from the audit results with an expression of complete disgust. "Mr. Chin, does your client wish to revise his petition in light of this evidence?" Jason Chin was sweating profusely now, clearly realizing that his own legal career was in jeopardy. "Your Honor, I move to withdraw the restraining order petition entirely. My client, my former client, clearly provided me with false information." Motion granted, Judge Morrison said immediately. "The petition for a restraining order against Mrs. Rothwell is dismissed with prejudice." But Elena wasn't finished. "Your Honor, we'd like to present our cross-petition for a restraining order against Mr. Rothwell, based on his documented pattern of financial stalking, surveillance, harassment, and criminal conspiracy." For the next 20 minutes, Elena methodically presented evidence that painted a picture of systematic abuse that was the exact opposite of what Damien had claimed. Real hospital records showing my work-related injuries with medical explanations. Actual witness statements from neighbors who had never heard domestic violence but had observed Damien's suspicious behavior. Bank records proving his unauthorized access to my accounts. Security footage showing him tampering with building cameras, most damning of all were Damien's own words, recorded during his planning sessions with his accomplices, where he detailed his strategy to destroy her reputation and take everything she's worked for. When Elena finished presenting our evidence, Judge Morrison didn't hesitate. "Mrs. Rothwell's petition for a restraining order against her husband is granted. Mr. Rothwell is prohibited from coming within 500 feet of Mrs. Rothwell, her place of employment, her residence, or any member of her family. She turned to face Damien directly. Furthermore, Mr. Rothwell, you are hereby held in contempt of court for presenting fraudulent evidence. You will serve 30 days in county jail, and I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for potential perjury charges. As the police officers moved to arrest Damien, he made one final, desperate attempt to salvage something from his collapsed plan. This isn't over, Veronica, he shouted as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. You think you've won, but you've destroyed both our lives. No one will ever trust you again. Your career is finished. I stood up slowly, looking at this man who had tried to systematically destroy everything I'd built, and felt nothing but pity. Damien, I said quietly, my voice carrying clearly in the now silent courtroom, the only thing you've destroyed is yourself. And you did it by underestimating the woman you thought you could manipulate. As they led him away, Judge Morrison addressed the remaining attendees. This court will be issuing a formal notice to the State Bar regarding Mr. Chen's failure to verify evidence before presentation. Mrs. Rodriguez, please ensure that all evidence in this case is preserved for the criminal proceedings that will undoubtedly follow. Elena nodded professionally. Of course, Your Honor. We'll also be cooperating fully with the FBI's ongoing investigation into the broader fraud network. As the courtroom emptied, I sat quietly for a moment, processing what had just happened. 2 weeks ago, I'd been a victim who didn't even know she was being targeted. Today, I'd watched my abuser be arrested, exposed, and publicly humiliated by the very system he tried to weaponize against me. Catalina, who had been sitting in the gallery taking notes, came over and hugged me tightly. How does it feel to watch justice actually work? She asked. I looked around the courtroom where Damien had expected to destroy my life and instead had destroyed his own. It feels like the beginning of something new, I said. Outside the courthouse, Elena addressed the small group of reporters who had gathered after word of the dramatic hearing spread. This case demonstrates the importance of thorough investigation and the dangers of accepting allegations at face value, she said. Mrs. Rothwell's courage in fighting back against systematic manipulation has not only protected herself but has exposed a criminal network that was victimizing other people as well. As we walked down the courthouse steps, I realized that Damien had been right about one thing: this wasn't over. But not in the way he'd intended. This was just the beginning of making sure that what happened to me never happened to anyone else. 6 months after watching Damien get arrested in that Riverside County courtroom, I stood in front of a packed auditorium at UCLA's School of Law, addressing an audience of attorneys, law enforcement officers, and domestic violence advocates about the sophisticated tactics of financial and legal abuse that nearly destroyed my life. The most dangerous predators, I began, my voice steady and confident in a way I never could have imagined during those dark months of manipulation, are the ones who use the very systems designed to protect us as weapons to destroy us. They understand that a restraining order based on lies can be more devastating than physical violence, because it turns your own community against you. In the front row, Elena Rodriguez beamed with pride. Beside her sat Detective Sarah Huang, who had become a close friend and collaborator in the months following Damien's arrest. Next to them were Dr. Sarah Kim and Catalina, the core team that had helped me transform from victim to victor. The aftermath of Damien's exposure had unfolded like dominoes falling in perfect sequence. Within 48 hours of his arrest, the FBI had uncovered a nationwide network of coordinated divorce fraud involving 17 different cases across 8 states. Damien's conspiracy with Jason Chin, Linda Foster, Thomas Bradley, and Marcus Webb had been just one branch of a sophisticated operation that specialized in destroying women during divorce proceedings. Jason Chin had been disbarred and sentenced to 3 years in federal prison for conspiracy and fraud. Linda Foster faced similar charges and had agreed to cooperate with authorities in exchange for a reduced sentence. Thomas Bradley's private investigation license was revoked, and he was serving an 18-month sentence for stalking and evidence tampering. Marcus Webb had been fired from Mercy General Hospital and was facing federal charges for HIPAA violations, but it was Damien's fate that provided the most satisfying closure. The embezzlement charges from Henderson and Associates, combined with the federal fraud conspiracy charges, had resulted in a 7-year prison sentence. His attempts to manipulate the legal system had ultimately led to him losing everything he tried to steal from me. More importantly, the $127,000 he'd stolen from his employer's client accounts was being used to compensate his victims, including the portion that would have been my divorce settlement. The irony wasn't lost on me that Damien's own criminal proceeds were funding my new life. The key to surviving this type of systematic abuse, I continued my presentation, is understanding that silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes, silence is strategy. Sometimes, letting your abuser think they're winning gives you the time and space to build an unshakable case. After my presentation, the questions came fast and furious. Attorneys wanted to know how to identify fabricated evidence. Law enforcement officers asked about the warning signs of coordinated fraud conspiracies. Domestic violence advocates sought advice on supporting clients facing legal manipulation, but the question that moved me most came from a young woman in the back of the auditorium. "Mrs. Castellanos," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "my ex-husband just filed for custody of our children, claiming I'm an unfit mother. He's saying I have a drinking problem and that I've been neglecting them. None of it's true, but he has photos and witness statements. How do I fight back when it feels like everyone believes his lies?" I walked down from the podium and stood in the aisle near her. "What's your name?" "Amanda," she whispered. "Amanda, the first thing you need to understand is that you're not alone, and you're not crazy. The second thing is that liars always make mistakes, because lies require perfect memory and perfect coordination. Truth doesn't. We're going to connect you with resources today, before you leave this room." After the event, Elena, Detective Huang, and I spent 2 hours with Amanda and 3 other women who approached us with similar stories. Each case showed the same patterns of systematic evidence fabrication, financial manipulation, and legal system abuse that I'd experienced. This had become my new mission. In the months following Damien's conviction, I'd left my position at Mercy General Hospital not because I'd been forced out, but because I'd discovered a higher calling. Working with Elena's law firm and a network of professionals across the country, I'd helped establish the Financial and Legal Abuse Recovery Network, or FLARN. Our organization provided free consultations, expert referrals, and coordinated legal support for people facing the type of sophisticated manipulation that had nearly destroyed me. We'd already helped over 200 women and men fight back against false accusations, fraudulent legal proceedings, and financial terrorism disguised as divorce strategy. The work was challenging and emotionally demanding, but it was also deeply fulfilling in a way that my nursing career, as much as I'd loved it, had never been. Every case we won felt like another victory against the system of abuse that had tried to crush me. My personal life had also transformed dramatically. The apartment on Maple Street that I'd shared with Damien was now just a painful memory. I'd moved to a beautiful condo in Newport Beach, ironically not far from where Damien had grown up. The location wasn't chosen for revenge, it was simply a fresh start in a place with no memories of manipulation or fear. I'd also reconnected with my mother, Carmen, in a deeper way than we'd shared since I was a child. The money I'd been secretly giving her for medications, the same money Damien had tried to characterize as gambling addiction, had helped her achieve financial stability for the first time in decades. She'd moved to a comfortable senior community near my new home, and we had dinner together every Sunday. "Mija," she told me just last week, "I'm so proud of the woman you've become. Not just because you survived what that man tried to do to you, but because you turned your pain into purpose." She was right. The trauma of Damien's betrayal had initially felt like it would destroy everything I'd worked to build. Instead, it had revealed strengths I never knew I possessed and led me to work that felt more meaningful than anything I'd ever done. The dating world remained complicated. Trust didn't come easily after systematic manipulation, and I was selective about letting new people into my life. But I'd learned to recognize red flags that I'd missed before, and more importantly, I'd learned to trust my own instincts and value my own judgment. Last month, I'd started seeing Michael Harrison, a fellow domestic violence advocate who worked with male survivors of abuse. Our relationship was developing slowly, built on mutual respect and shared understanding of how trauma could be transformed into healing work. As I drove home from UCLA that evening, I reflected on how completely my life had changed. 18 months ago, I'd been a woman who trusted too easily, questioned herself too much, and believed that love meant accepting manipulation as affection. Today, I was someone who understood the difference between healthy conflict and systematic abuse, who knew how to build alliances and fight strategically, and who had learned that true strength sometimes looked like patience rather than immediate reaction. My phone buzzed with a text from Amanda, the young woman from the auditorium. Mrs. Castellanos, the attorney you referred me to says my ex-husband made the same mistakes yours did. We found evidence that he's been staging photos and manipulating documents. Thank you for showing me that I could fight back. Messages like that one reminded me why I'd chosen this path. Damien had tried to destroy me by isolating me, making me question my own reality, and turning the legal system against me. But his efforts had ultimately led me to discover that I wasn't alone, that his tactics weren't unique, and that there were ways to fight back effectively. The work wasn't always successful. Some cases involved such sophisticated manipulation or such corrupt local systems that justice was elusive. Some victims weren't ready to fight back or lacked the resources to mount an effective defense. But every victory mattered, and every person we helped represented another life saved from systematic destruction. As I pulled into my driveway that night, I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror and saw a woman I barely recognized from 18 months ago. Stronger, wiser, more confident, and completely free from the fear that had once controlled every aspect of my life. Damien had tried to write the ending to my story, planning to leave me with nothing but shame and financial ruin. Instead, his betrayal had become the beginning of the most meaningful chapter of my life. Tomorrow, I would wake up in my own home, go to work helping other people reclaim their lives from abusers, and continue building something powerful from the ashes of what he tried to destroy. Sometimes the most devastating betrayals become the foundation for the most remarkable transformations. And sometimes, the people who try to break us end up showing us exactly how strong we really are. Coming up next, you'll see 2 more stories we handpicked just for you. If this one struck a chord, you're going to love what's next. Tap to keep the journey going.